Hey, welcome back, everyone. Dr. Boghossian here. I want to welcome you to class today. We have been discussing natural law ethics, and this is part 2 of that discussion. If you have not watched part 1, please go back and click on the previous link so you can watch the first portion of this, along with some interesting and stimulating cases and thought experiments. And also download the note sheet that you can find in the lecture materials tab for this module to help you follow along. What we're going to do today is continue by picking up where we left off, talking about how it is that the 4 inherent goods or inclinations or values that natural law theory believes arise from our objective psychophysical human nature, how those things sometimes come into conflict. You might recall by way of review that those 4 values or inclinations include the good of human life, right? Life is intrinsically valuable, and so we ought to promote life and well-being and protect it. Number 2, the good of procreation and family, and so we ought to promote the good of family. That's an arrangement where you can have two people in a committed union that can produce children and promote the good of those children. And so, sex and romantic relationship needs to occur within that framework, right? To promote and protect the good of family and procreation. Number 3, the distinctly human value of knowledge, the pursuit of knowledge. So stifling of inquiry or even speech, right? Free speech would be wrong, and we'll look at an example about free speech today. And number 4, the good of sociability. This is the good of friendship and bonds of affection. And so what we're going to look at today is how these things come into conflict and whether or not natural law theory has some supplemental principles that can help them rationally navigate and resolve these conflicts to figure out what the right thing to do is. Or do they just get stuck with these difficult cases and they don't have a way to resolve them? Now, I want to just put out there that you might not like the result of the reasoning through the natural law theory, but it wouldn't follow from that the theory itself is flawed. Maybe it's us, right, that need to get on board with natural law theory and just learn to make difficult choices and live with things, difficult choices that we don't, let's say, prefer. But let me pull up my screen and we'll look at some of these like we were looking at last time, along with some of the supplemental principles such as double effect. All right. Last time we looked at a couple of cases, one of which was when a family size gets too big and they can no longer afford to have more children. Would it be justified for them to use contraception? Typically, natural law theory says no. Is there a way to resolve that conflict between life and procreation? Number 2, we talked about the lifeboat case, right, where there are too many people, more people than can fit on a life raft. If all lives are equally valuable, we have life against life. They say you can't rank lives because all lives are of equal value. Then the third case that we didn't talk about that is probably in your notes, the third conflict, is prisoner and information. This is if we capture a prisoner in like a war scenario that we believe to have information about bombing targets, would it be okay to torture them for information? Now, here are the issue in all 3 of those conflicts. At the heart, natural law theory is not only a kind of objectivism, it's also an absolutism. Those are different concepts. Objectivism says there's an objectively right thing to do in every case. Now, what you get in some views, like you heard from Sam Harris a number of weeks ago, he has a kind of objectivism that allows for flexibility in the moral principles. Sometimes it might be right to lie, like to save an innocent life. So that's a non-absolutist objectivism. Natural law theory believes that morality is objective, right? And moral values and duties are objective, but they're also binding and they're non-negotiable. They're inflexible. If it's wrong to lie, it's always wrong to lie. If it's right to tell the truth, you should tell the truth. If we should promote and protect human life, we always should. If procreative sexual intercourse is the right form sex should take, then it's always right to pursue it in that form. All right, now, all three of these conflict cases are cases where moral absolutes are coming into conflict. That's what's creating the problem. All values are equally valuable, right? So they don't come on a sliding scale. Friendship isn't down here and life is up here, right? They're equal. Number two, you can't resolve the conflicts by saying, well, which one is going to have the best consequences on the whole? This is a non-utilitarian theory, right? It's never okay to use some good as a means to some, quote, greater good. That's to resort to utilitarian consequentialist thinking, and natural law theorists find that to be deeply mistaken, because what you end up doing is degrading some moral value in order to achieve some other moral value. So in other words, you can't degrade the good of procreation in the interest of the good of the family. That would be what a utilitarian might say, but that's not natural law theory. Number three here, what is key in what makes a difference to evaluating an action as right or wrong, or figuring out whether an action is right or wrong, is what is our core intention? An intention is what we're setting out to accomplish when we act. Now, there might be more than one, as we'll see, but what the core intention is makes a huge difference. And this is where you can see it runs contrary to a natural law, to a utilitarian view. On the utilitarian view, intentions don't make a moral difference. For natural law theory, intentions are a game changer. And this is where we get the doctrine of double effect comes in. An action could be a good action, right? But you could do it for the wrong reasons, and that shows that our intention is wrong. Now, we'll praise you for doing the right action if we're all natural law theorists, but we wouldn't praise you for being a good person because you do the right thing for the wrong reasons. So we want to become people, on this view at least, become people who do the right thing for the right reasons. That's going to turn out to be motivated by natural law reasoning. So an example here would be, why do you give money to charity? Well, if you're giving money to charity to get likes on Facebook because you take a selfie while you're giving to the homeless guy on the street, well, that would be wrong, right? You should do it not to be seen. You should do it just, because you're promoting that person's well-being. You shouldn't do it to boost the brand, your brand of your company. You should do it just because it's a good thing to do. Now, by way of review, natural law theory says we ought to promote these biological and distinctly human values. That's how we know we're doing the right thing. Intention makes a moral difference. Now, there are two further qualifying principles that can serve in helping us resolve when these inclinations or values come into conflict. Number one, the principle of forfeiture. Initially, you have a right to your life and well-being. But if you are a threat to somebody else's life and well-being, you don't lose your human value, but you lose rights that attach to that value, like the right to not be harmed. So if you're a threat to someone else's well-being, you forfeit your right to not be harmed. You don't lose your value, you still have intrinsic value, but the right to your own well-being gets compromised by the way you act. If you steal from another person, your right to not be harmed, or your right to not be imprisoned, or your right to roam about, right, gets compromised because you give that up, willfully give that up by the way that you act, okay? You may not think of yourself as a natural law theorist, but we often use the principle of forfeiture in our own reasoning, or especially even in our academic context, or in a legal context. So think academically, maybe a professor might say to you, look, here's the syllabus and the policies. You didn't follow the policies, therefore you've given up your right to take the exam, okay, or the right to turn this in. So initially you had the right to turn it in because you're an enrolled student, but if you don't abide by the guidelines, follow the rules, right, you forfeit your right to complete the work. In a legal context, right, a judge might say to you, look, sure, that's your child, but you forfeited your rights as a parent to have the child in your custody because you're a threat to their well-being. Okay, that's the principle of forfeiture. That might help us figure out how to resolve some tensions, right? Let's suppose in the lifeboat case, there are 4 people who are threatening the rest of you. They're trying to tackle people out of the raft and hold them under and drown them. Well, okay, they forfeit their right to be on the raft, you might say. But if no one's doing that, right, well, then all 24 lives are equally valuable. The forfeiture is not in place. How about the torture case? Some people would justify torture by saying, by being a threat to national security, they've forfeited their right to not be tortured. It turns out natural law theorists actually disagree on the principle of forfeiture being used there. And we'll see why when we get to this second principle, namely, and they also disagree on capital punishment. So some people believe if you commit capital murder, right, you've taken away something of intrinsic worth that's irreplaceable, it's immeasurable. So the only other equal value, right, is to take away the murderer's life in capital punishment. Natural law theorists disagree. Some are for capital punishment, some are against it on that rationale. And we'll see why here in a minute. And that goes down to double effect. Double effect, right, is the idea that an action may be morally allowed, morally permissible, even if it's got one bad effect and one good effect. Okay? So you could foreknow, right, you could predict that if you choose something, it's going to have a bad effect and a good effect. But what's important to the action being permissible, even if it's got a good and bad effect, is you can't be willing the bad effect. You have to be intending or willing the good effect, and the bad effect arises as an unintended consequence, okay? So this is how this looks. There are 4 principles, 4 criteria that must be met in order for you to pass the doctrine of double effect and be able to perform the action. Okay, let me say that another way. If you act and the action is going to have a good and bad effect, you have to meet all 4 of these criteria to actually choose that action, okay? If you don't meet all 4 criteria, it turns out to be a wrong action on natural law theory. And we're going to use lots of examples so you can see how this works. So here are the general criteria. We're going to then use a bunch of case studies to work through all 4 criteria and see how it passes or fails one or more of them. Number 1, the act you want to perform has to be good or permissible. Okay, let's say, okay, is protecting your life a good thing? Yes, that promotes the good of human life and well-being. Now, if in protecting your life you harm someone else, if that's a negative byproduct, right? So like in self-defense, okay, you would pass this one, right? Because the root intention is to protect yourself. If the root intention is vindictive hatred towards someone else, then you don't pass this, right? But if someone is coming at you or your family and your main intention is to protect your well-being and your family's well-being, then that act itself is good. Number 2, is the bad effect what's being used to get the good effect? Okay, if it is, then it would fail criteria 2, right? Because you could see this is against utilitarianism. Utilitarians say, yeah, you could use something bad to get something good. The ends justify the means. Not on natural law theory. The bad effect cannot be what you're using to get a good effect. So it's never right to do a wrong to get a good end on natural law. So that's criteria 2. The ends do not justify the means. You have to will what's good. And if the bad effect is an accidental byproduct, right, it's unintended, then, and what you're really willing is the good effect, but there's also this bad effect, then you would pass criteria 2. Number 3. Excuse me. The bad effect has to be unavoidable. In other words, when you're trying to get the good effect, in trying to get the good effect, if this is the only way to get the good effect, and that's your root intention, and it also brings about the bad effect, that's what we mean by saying it's unavoidable. The bad effect is unavoidable. If there's another way to get the good effect, the good end, without bringing about that bad thing, well, then you should do that on natural law theory. So we'll use lots of cases. Just hang with me. I know this is theoretical. We'll use a couple of cases where that'll make more concrete sense. Number 4, the principle of proportionality. The good and bad effect have to be proportionate to one another in order to pass the doctrine of double effect. So like in the lifeboat cases, are all lives proportionate? Yes. Is the good of, promoting your family's well-being equal to the good of procreation? Yes. Okay. So we're going to now look at some cases that pass all 4 and that fail at least one, if not more of these. So you can see how this works to try to resolve hard cases on the natural law view. Here we go. Let's suppose we have a pregnant woman, and let's say this woman has a kind of cancer. And let's say she's in her second trimester, so the pregnancy is viable. Okay. But it turns out that if she takes chemo or radiation, it's likely to kill the fetus, the baby. Okay. Now, let's suppose there's, for the sake of argument, there's one and only one drug she can take to get well. Now, on natural law theory, right, we've got a tension. Taking the drug to get well and promoting her well-being is good, but on natural law theory, right, all lives, including unborn lives, are of equal value. So you can't say that the mother's life is more valuable, rank it above the unborn's life. For them, all human life from conception on has equal worth, okay? Now, if there's only one drug that can cure the disease, whatever it is, would it be morally justified for the woman to take that drug knowing in advance that it will cause the death of the baby, the unborn? Yes or no, why or why not? Okay, criteria number one, is taking a drug to get well, that's the root intention, permissible? Yes. If her intention is to take the drug because she really wants an abortion, well, that would be wrong. It would fail criteria one. But if her main goal is to get well, well, then so far so good, right? That's an intrinsically good action to promote your health and well-being. But it's going to cause the bad effect of killing the child. Okay, so far we've got the good effect of keeping her well, the unintended side effect of the death of the baby. Number two, the abortion, right? The termination of the fetus by taking the drug as a side effect is not the means to curing the mother. Now, please get this. She's not having to get the abortion to get well. She has to take the drug to get well. So it would pass number two, because if her core intention is to get well and not to, let's say, end the baby's life, well, then the ending of the baby's life is an accidental, unintended, even though foreseen, side effect of taking the drug to get well. So far, so good. Number three, let's suppose, as I built it, there's one and only one drug that can help her get well. If there's only one drug that can help her get well, criteria three, she now has a difficult decision to make, right? Because even though she knows in advance, and the doctors know in advance, if she chooses to take the drug, it'll make her well, but it'll also cause the death of her baby. That bad side effect is unavoidable. Now, if there was a drug B she could take and also get well that would not cause the death of the baby, then on natural law theory, drug A would violate criteria three, right? Because she would have an alternative. She wouldn't have to also have the bad effect, right? But I set it up with there's only one drug, so far so good. Proportionality, yes, on natural law theory, the mother's life and the baby's life are equal. So the bad and good effect are equal. So this case, as I've described it, passes all four criteria. And the mother and her significant other, if she has one, have a very hard case to make. It would both be morally permissible on natural law to take the drug to get well, causing the death of the baby, or she would be free to, on natural law theory, she would be morally allowed to not take the drug and allow the baby to be brought to term and sacrifice her life to save the baby's life. And there was a real life case in the state of Michigan a couple of years ago where this happened. The couple had multiple children. The mother had cancer. She decided she wanted to give up her life for the baby, and her husband consented. And she ended up dying, right? And the baby lived. That's not wrong on natural law theory, right? Because of the same reasoning here. Hard case, they have to choose. Either choice they make is permissible, but there's going to be a bad effect and a good effect. Let's look at another case real quick. All right, let's suppose you're coming to take the next exam here, maybe in a week or two. And now we're imagining pre-COVID. Let's suppose you go to campus to study, and you're allowed to go to campus, right? And you can't study at home. Every place in town, all the Starbucks are shut down. So you go on campus and you see these yellow warning signs saying that there's workers working on the building. Excuse me. And there's light in only one classroom in AC1. And so you climb the stairs to go to this classroom, but as you approach this classroom, before you enter, there's a big red and yellow sign that says, if you turn on the lights here, you're going to electrocute one of the workmen working in the floor below you, and it will kill them. Now, would you be morally justified to study, which is the good of pursuit of knowledge, to pass, do good on, let's say, my exam coming up, if you know that in flipping on the lights to study, you will kill the person, the worker below? Well, criteria one, is reading your ethics text a good thing? Well, yes, that's a permissible action if that's your main goal. Is the bad effect, the killing of the workman, a means to the good effect? No, right? You're not lighting him or her up in order to study, right? Then that would be using them as a means, right? As grotesque as that is, to pursue the good of knowledge. It would fail if that's what you were doing, but here it passes, so far so good. Is the bad effect avoidable? Okay, let's suppose that it is. The light on your phone doesn't work. There's no other way to study. Okay, where it actually fails is criteria 4, is studying equal to the life of the workman? Well, now, okay, the answer is no, and that's because, right, there may be a way out for you. An alternative might be emailing your professor and saying, look, here's my predicament. And so reading and studying, even though it is the good of human knowledge, which is initially ranked the same as life, in this case is not the same. Studying is not of the same value as the worker's life. So you should not, you would not be morally justified to study if that meant the death of an innocent person. All right, case number 3, hydrocephalic fetus. If you want to Google that with care later, you can look that up and you can get pictures even to know what that means. But Google with care. Basically, the idea is a hydrocephalic fetus is where a fetus has swelling on the brain, and so their head is so large that the mother could not give birth naturally, vaginally, right? Because it would be impossible. There would be bad tearing and she'd bleed out and die probably. So what happens is one of a couple things, right? Either you remove the baby by C-section, or the baby's skull is crushed to remove the fetus from the womb. Now, I want you to imagine a case where a C-section, for whatever reason, is not possible for some reason, okay? Rare, but could happen. And so the case here is where, would it be morally justified for the woman to have the doctor perform a craniotomy, which is the crushing of the skull, right? Which would surely kill the baby in order to save the mother's life. So this is different than the first case of taking the drug, as we'll see in a second. Okay, let's suppose the root intention, the root action in getting the craniotomy is to save the mother's life. So it's the baby's life or the mother's life, both can't live. The good effect would be attempting to save the mother. Where this actually fails, though, is a criteria 2, right? Because the baby's death is the means to saving the mother's life. And it's never morally justified on natural law to end someone's life like this, right? An innocent life, to save someone's life. The difference in this case from self-defense is that in self-defense, right, someone is a threat to you intentionally, and that forfeits their innocence. The baby, while in some sense a threat, right, is not a threat in the morally relevant sense. It hasn't done anything, right, to intend to have a swollen brain to threaten the mom. It's a freak thing of nature that's going on. It's an accident. No one has intended this. But so intending the death of the baby is intending the death of an innocent, a morally innocent being, entity, that has equal moral status to the woman. So it would be wrong to perform the craniotomy to save the mother's life. So you have a difficult situation here, right? Because really what natural law says, we could stop here without putting these other 2 criteria up, says that you'd have to, let the mother carry the baby to term, and really you have to allow both basically to die, or at least allow her to die. Maybe the baby has the chance of dying. 2, Now, this is where some natural law theorists will fudge, right? And some would say, okay, save one life, don't let them both die. So some options in some cases would be, sometimes they can actually they can remove the fluid from the brain to cause shrinkage of the head so that they could deliver the baby by C-section or naturally. But if you can't do that, well, then some natural law theorists will bite the bullet, as we say, and they'll say, save the mother or the baby, but don't let two die. The hardcore natural law theorists, to be maximally consistent, would have to say that's not justified on double effect or on natural law theory. So this is a especially hard case. It's probably rare these days, but it could happen. All right. Last case for today that I think is really relevant to our times. And I'm going to ask you to pause after I talk through just the case briefly. And then I'll come back and tell you what natural law theory would say. Okay, here's the question. Let's imagine someone wants to either bring a speaker to campus that's controversial and might ruffle some feathers, or you want to say something, right, in speech class or out in the quad, advocating for some moral viewpoint or political viewpoint that is going to make some people mad. And so maybe some contingent of the student population at Clovis Community College decides to, or whatever college you go to, right, decides to protest and try to deplatform you. Say that you or deplatform this person, get them uninvited, disinvited. Is suppressing free inquiry and speech, even what some might call hate speech, morally permissible on natural law theory? So now the question here isn't whether hate speech is okay per se, it's whether perceived hate speech, right? So if I don't like your view and I call that hate speech, okay, let's suppose, right, it's a morally controversial view. Would it be okay to shut that down, to deplatform or disinvite someone in the name of protecting my feelings or some of my friends' feelings because they're going to get hurt by what you say? They're going to get their feathers ruffled. Yes or no, why or why not? How, running through the 4 criteria, what kind of answer would natural law theory say? Okay, I've specified on the screen what the good and bad effect are to make it very clear to you. The bad effect would be suppressing free inquiry to kind of protect people. The good effect would be maintaining, let's say, truth and authority and order, right, by suppressing free speech. Maybe you don't want that said, or the group thinks it's a false view. Or maybe you want to maintain a kind of authority and order on campus. You don't want there to be unrest. Can you invoke the principle of forfeiture? Okay, you can answer that. What about double effect? Okay, pause the video, take a few minutes to think about this, and then come back, and I'm going to talk about this case and some caveats and so on, and what natural law theory would say. Okay, this is a really interesting and important case. Natural law theory, given the intrinsic goods of knowledge, the pursuit of knowledge, as well as sociability, they're going to be very strong advocates of free expression, free speech, open and free exchange of ideas and inquiry, even uncomfortable ones. They are not going to be advocates of inciting violence, okay? And that is because that would go against natural law. Nor are they going to say you should be deliberately degrading in your speech, right? So go back to some of the things we talked about, slander, lying, defamation. Those, now you'd have to make an objective case that that's what's going on. But if someone is just advocating for, I don't know, let's suppose you think the pro-life position is scandalous and hateful, or this pro-choice, or vice versa, right? The pro-choice is scandalous and hateful. Well, okay, that would probably be misusing hate speech in either direction. Same with other controversial views about human sexuality, all these hot button ethical issues. There are really smart people who disagree on those things. And so natural law theory generally says the way we deal with purported bad ideas is to let them be expressed, and then we critically engage them. right? We look at the evidence for and against them so that we can root them out and pursue the truth together. So they initially would say that shutting down free speech, right, suppressing it in the name of protecting people's feelings is wrong, because reason needs to take, the pursuit of knowledge and reason and truth should take precedent over my comfort, okay? I could choose to not go to the event, so could you, right? That's a live option. And the person who has the controversial view hasn't forfeited their right to speak simply because I don't like it, okay? Now, if it is incitement or defamation, then the principle of forfeiture would apply, okay? Could apply. What about double effect? Okay, double effect. Double effect, you couldn't use double effect here either, because again, if the goal of the person speaking freely, even controversially, is to pursue the truth and express theirself in order to pursue the truth and promote knowledge, then that is fine, right? And if your discomfort is the bad effect, that's not the means to the good effect, okay? And your comfort is equal, right? And it's proportionate, and it might even be unavoidable. But it might be avoidable, right? You don't have to go, okay? So it would pass all of those. So no, on natural law, we should not be deplatforming, canceling, shutting down views that we don't like. We can avoid them, right? But we should try to get people fired because they advocate some view that we don't like, et cetera, okay? Instead, we should have the open free exchange of ideas, especially on a college campus. Whatever how political they are, pro Donald Trump, pro Joe Biden, anti either one or both because you like the third party option C, et cetera, et cetera. What we need to become on the natural law view are rational people who can openly entertain even problematic views we find problematic in order to pursue the truth together. With that in mind, we're going to call it a day. Please think about these things, and I look forward to seeing you next time to talk about our next ethical theory. And I hope you found some very interesting and helpful things with this. Take care.